Since the dawn of creation, some of God's creatures have wanted to be like God. Intrigued by the serpent's claim that they would be like God, Adam and Eve took a bite of fruit. In an effort to assert their will over God's, they began building a tower to make a name for themselves. Human nature and desire haven't changed since then. Many today realize there has been a sea change in Western culture's worldview. The Judeo-Christian worldview is becoming or is a minority view. Carl Tykrid writes, "We are witnessing a titanic impact at the crossroads of religion, politics, technology, and culture. Fundamentally, it is a collision of worldviews, and we are all experiencing the shockwaves. As with the Tower of Babel, man again attempts to create the temple of man in the age of re-enchantment." Join the people of the book as Carl Tykrid gives a guided tour of the game of gods.
And here is the crew, and there's Don Williams, who was waiting patiently in the shadows there. Carl, we have this week and next week.
What?
I know.
Yep.
We'll be looking at wrapping it all up next week as we go into the final chapter and take a look at just how we can begin to think and process what we've all been talking about.
And then we have sort of a group question, because Don Williams will be starting the 95 thesis back up the week after that. So his question is, do we just pick up where we left off with a little bit of recap, or do we erase everything and start over from the beginning? So y'all let me know what you think of that.
We'll ponder that.
Ponder that, yes. But don't ponder it while Carl's teaching. Ponder it afterwards.
No. Good point.
Yeah, no pandering. No, pondering is
No
good.
pondering,
no pandering.
No
Yeah.
pandering, yes.
All right, Carl. And with that, where do you want to begin?
Well, let's jump into the slides and we will go from there. So we're going to be looking today, of course, at part 2 of celebrating oneness, but I want to set a bit of a stage because this evening we're going to be tackling Burning Man and going into that specifically. And simply being because it represents kind of the mothership of transformational culture. It's not the biggest event, but it's probably the most impactful by far, and has set the tone for so much of this worldview and its expressions. So as we consider what it means to be a witness for Christ, we realize that there are 3 primary models of outreach in the New Testament. We've touched on this in the past, but it's well worth looking at it again as we consider what does it mean to be ambassadors in a pagan age, because essentially that's what we're looking at having to become. So we see 3 primary models. You probably can break this down into more categories, but this is what I have. So the first model is the appeal to scriptural authority. And this is the model that Jesus uses specifically when dealing with religious rulers and his disciples. And it's based on the understanding that you should know better. It's exhortation. It's teaching. Have you not read is a prime statement, as Jesus now is going back to scripture to make an argument, to make his case, to present facts about himself and about his mission. And of course, the scripture that he's referring to is not what we have in the New Testament. He is referring to the Old Testament. He's referring to the law and the prophets and the books of wisdom, along with the minor prophets. And so that's that.
You know what? There's a corollary to that one, which is you do err not knowing the scriptures of the power of God.
100%.
So he deals with the scriptures. He says, by the way, you don't even know them.
Yeah. Oh, exactly, Don. And this is the model that we need to understand is the primary model we use when we're dealing with somebody who is making some appeal to religious scriptural authority. This should be our appeal inside the church as we deal with error. It should be our appeal to those who are pseudo-Christian cults like the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses, who claim to have a scriptural authority to be able to then use that as we unpack what they believe and demonstrate that they don't know what they're talking about, or that they do know what they're talking about, but that it is an error. And so that's the primary approach. We don't use this approach when it comes to the person who has never heard the gospel ever before. Model number 2 is the recognition of the personal, and this you see with Jesus ministering to the sinners, ministering to the tax collectors, to the people who are mistrusted, the shunned individuals. The woman at the well is a prime example. As he is ministering to her, he's entered her dominion, her territory. He's entered at a very specific time of the day, and he has a very different approach than with the religious rulers. He's not treating her the same way that he treats the Pharisees or the Sadducees. Not at all. But there is still an appeal to truth with a measure of grace and an understanding that your approach is different because you're dealing with a different situation. The fact of truth is still there, but your context has changed. And then model number 3 is to acknowledge God as creator to a pagan culture. And this is the idea of being an ambassador for Christ in a community that doesn't have any real understanding of who Jesus or what the Gospels are about. Paul and Barnabas in Lystra, a good example is when he approaches them, he makes it very clear that this is to the living God. And who is this living God that Paul and Barnabas bring forward? Well, he's the one who is different than Zeus. He's the one who's different than Isis. He's the one who's different than Apollo. He's the one who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. He is unique. There is none like him. Then when we consider what it means to be an ambassador, we see this in 2 Corinthians, which of course Corinth was a pagan city. And this is a powerful passage. It took me a while to realize that this wasn't a metaphor or any kind of wordplay. When we take a look at some of the other writings of Paul, we see Paul talking about running a race or being a soldier for Christ. You know, I could run pretty fast if my brother is angry at me and there's some fear in my heart. I've ran pretty darn fast. I've never been a soldier, but I have friends who've been in combat, and I can at least grasp what that might be like by either watching movies or having conversations with my friends. And then Paul talks about being a farm laborer. I get that. I grew up on a farm. So I understand those, but those are all metaphors or word pictures. 2 Corinthians is not. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ. As though God were pleading through us, we implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. And what struck me was that the phrase, we are. It's not we're becoming. It's not you are like. We are. Oh, well, that's a pretty serious claim that we're ambassadors. And I know I've shared this with you a number of weeks back, but a good refresher. What is it? What does an ambassador do? I've been fortunate that I have spent a fair amount of time rubbing shoulders with ambassadors, with the diplomatic community, asking questions and being in meetings where they are giving some type of a backgrounder or some type of a speech. In fact, only a few weeks ago, I was at a UN meeting or a meeting on the future of the United Nations, where we had a couple of ambassadors talking about what they perceive. So years and years ago, when right after 9/11, I had the fortune of being in Chicago when the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia was giving a breakdown of what his responsibilities would be, his new role would be. And it was a very interesting evening. It wasn't a lot of us at the meeting, but his explanation was eye-opening. And I walked away from there going, oh, okay, that's what an ambassador really is and what an ambassador does. And those are two different things, obviously. Mm-hmm. So first, an ambassador is the official and legal representative of the government. And for us, that is the King of Kings. Mm-hmm. And the very fact that we are the legal and official representative now brings into play a dynamic that's way beyond just simply, hi, I'm here on somebody's behalf. No, you are the one who is literally representing Jesus Christ to the nation around you, to those around you. you're in a position, and there's authority with that position. You should have a handle of what your king is asking of you, and what his power position is, because you're now to represent his interests and not your own. You're also to understand the customs of the land that you're in, and that came out in spades as the U.S. ambassador was discussing the workload he had to try to read up on Arabic history, Islam, all the nuances of the culture he'd be walking into. Not that he's part of it. In fact, he was very clear that his role is to be separate from it. He is literally set apart from it, but he is absolutely inside that world. And he has to be able to clearly communicate in a way that that culture will now understand what he is trying to convey. I thought when I was hearing this, my goodness, that whole understanding of what it means to be in the world and not of the world, all of a sudden kind of really came to light.
Sure.
And then an ambassador is there to, first of all, effectively communicate your king's message, but also to recognize when there's challenges to your king's interests. Alert the rest of the diplomatic community. Hey, be on guard. This is the challenge. This is the direction things are going. Any questions or comments on that little breakdown? Does it make sense?
Point two, yeah, it does make sense. Point two, especially because the fact that you are recognizing any challengers to the interest of your king, it's very interesting that we are to step up to the plate, so to speak.
Right.
When there's something that's challenging to truth, like for example, the truth of the gospel or anything along those terms, we should be able to defend it.
Absolutely. The other side to this, James, that's kind of interesting is an ambassador is involved in building bridges.
Right.
Not that there's building bridges of agreement, but building bridges of understanding. That's interesting, and it's about the idea of keeping peace. And sometimes I wrestle with, okay, what does that look like as Christians? Because we enter the interfaith realm, as you all know, going to the Parliament of World Religions and other places. And so I guess sometimes maybe that breaks down to our demeanor, our approach. Are we going in with antagonism, or are we going in to try to meet them as people and then build that bridge person to person while we bring the truth forward?
So I got a question, Carl.
Yeah.
Talking about that approach, talking about going in gently and all these things, and then we look at how Christ did it. And then sometimes I think, okay, that wasn't always so gentle. But that was God in the world, but it's pretty clear that we're not supposed to be like that, right? Paul teaches, don't get like that.
Can I interject something here?
Yeah. Yes, please.
You have two different situations.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus and the disciples were missionaries to the household of faith who were in rebellion to God. You deal differently with those who are in the household of faith than you do with those who are outside the faith.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely, and that's why you see that approach of the three models that I had up there. The first one where there's that appeal to Scripture, exhortation, and strong exhortation is often the part of that. Whereas he's dealing very differently with the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the people in Jerusalem,
scribes and all that. Yeah,
that's right. Versus those who are outside the faith. His approach with the scribes is very different than with Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Yeah. There's a very different way of that he handles it. There's a gentleness with the sinners. That's evident. He's spending time with them. He's eating with them. He's dining with them. He's, the religious, the rabbis. They're not pleased with Jesus. No, they're not pleased with him at all.
Don't like
because he's doing the thing that they should all be doing, but they're not. And so there's this beautiful model, but it's not, Jeff. I don't think it's a contrast. I think it's the context is one, and Don brought that out beautifully. The context is one versus the other.
It reminds me of Jude, where he's talking about snatching some from the flames. It really depends on the person, the context, what you're talking about. Sometimes
Right.
the approach needs to be real strong. Sometimes it needs to be really low key.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not always easy.
Dr.
One of the
Williams?
great things about the role of ambassador is that it tells us how we relate to God, it tells us how we relate to the world,
Mm.
and it tells us how we relate to the gospel.
Mm.
Because an ambassador has been given a brief.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he doesn't just show up in his country out of the blue and say whatever comes to his head. He knows this is what my government expects from you. This is what I'm authorized to promise you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And he can't step outside of that without authorization.
Right.
Right.
So the gospel is the treaty that we have been authorized and empowered to offer people.
Right.
We can promise them that if they confess with their mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in their heart that God raised him from the dead, that they will be saved. They will become citizens of our country.
Mm-hmm.
They will be invited to immigrate and become citizens, and all of their offenses against the king will be forgiven and pardoned, and they'll be restored to citizenship. And we have been given the authority and the power
Mm-hmm.
to make this promise, and God will back it up with all of the power of heaven.
Amen.
Just like the United
Amen.
States should back its ambassadors up
Amen.
with all of its military might.
Right.
And that means, that you got to pay attention to what the gospel says.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't play around with things like, well, what about people who've never heard? Well, I'm not authorized to promise them anything.
Exactly. Good point.
I have my message is I can promise you from God that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. And I can't step outside of that script,
Right.
because if I do, I'm no longer speaking for my king. I'm now going off on my own, and I'm probably going to get recalled as an ambassador.
Good way to put it.
So it helps me. It really helps me understand why it's important to be faithful to the message we were given. And so people come up with all kinds of questions like, what about people who've never heard? And the answer to that is, well, I don't have a promise for those people. I've not been authorized to promise salvation on any basis, but this is it. And we get back to that and we stick to it because that's our responsibility as an ambassador. So it's I like everything you're saying about this, and I think it's very, very useful way of looking at our relationship to God, our relationship to the people we are supposed to reach, and our relationship to the gospel.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's more relevant. It's always been relevant, and don't get me wrong. But now we have a pagan culture. With the paganization of the culture, it becomes even more prevalent to be able to use that. Yes. All right, flip back to the slides.
Back to the slides, he says, like that.
Back to the side.
Thank you. So, pardon me, I've got a bit of a cold after my travel. Acts 17 is a wonderful example of what it looks like to be that ambassador. And I could read the whole thing, but, I will quickly read it. It won't take too long.
Mm-hmm.
And Acts 17, we see, of course, Paul is in Athens. It's not like there's a church on every corner in Athens. It's
I think so.
But there's an idol to every known god.
Well, there you go.
And
There
just so
is
you don't
that.
miss it, just so you don't miss any, they had an idol to the unknown god.
Yep.
Hate to get destroyed by one that you didn't know about.
Exactly. So here we go in verse 16. We see that Paul is now, he's waiting for them in Athens. His spirit was provoked when he saw that the city was given over to idols. And this assumes now that Paul has actually spent time surveying and understanding the city. He's done a walkabout, as I guess the Aussies would say. Therefore, he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshippers, and in the marketplace daily with those who happened to be there. Then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him, and some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, pardon me, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection." And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore we want to know what these things mean. For all the Athenians and foreigners who were there spent time in nothing else, but either to tell or hear some new thing." Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you, God who made the world and everything in it." Now, notice this. I mean, he doesn't say, "Hey, let me give you the 4 spiritual laws," or anything on. Yeah, he's actually starts off with the fact God is other.
Right.
This is a Genesis 1:1 argument. The God here that I'm introducing to you is not the same as all these other monuments and shrines and idols that are set up. And of course, he's actually in front of a council. He's in front of a judicial court, and he is being grilled by a judicial court that has its history going all the way back into the pagan past of Athens. And these judges are going to determine, in essence, whether Paul is saying something that is relevant to the Athenians, or if he should maybe get the boot and look to go elsewhere. Of course, the backdrop is the Temple of Zeus is right behind him. The Temple of Isis is right there. Athena is right there. I can't think of a more intimidating situation to find yourself in. Hi, you're before the judges of the city, and we got the backup of our big pagan bosses right here behind us. And you screw up, and there's the door. Anyways, I'll continue on. God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. This is awesome argumentation. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We'll have coffee, and we want to talk about this some more."
And we'll get back to you.
Yeah. And
Part
some
two.
we know came to faith.
Mm-hmm.
What an awesome approach.
Wow.
So he recognizes the spiritual situation. He engages with the Jewish and the Gentile believers. There's obviously a synagogue in the city. He encounters the philosophers. He's taken to their judges. He can now leverage the culture. He can leverage what he has seen, the unknown God. And in doing that, he can present that, hey, the God that you are searching for, I know who this God is, and he is not unknown. And now he presents who this God is, the God that is the true creator, Lord of heaven and earth. And he understands their worldview and even quotes their own hymn, their own philosophers, their own poets. And in so doing, of course, that he received what you will receive and what I will receive, and that is mockery by some, and a few who will say, let's go and sit down and have a conversation. And in all this, Paul is, of course, the messenger. He's the ambassador. It's the Holy Spirit that does the change. So all that is a backdrop, and we'll probably end up running out of time with all this, but we'll go to part 2, and that is the mother lode of transformational culture, and that's the Black Rock Desert, and the event that happens once a year in that vast empty land, and that is Burning Man. And Burning Man was founded in part by the gentleman Larry Harvey, probably the most well-known founder of Burning Man, and this is a famous quote by him: Burning Man is a self-service cult. Wash your own brain. And the city that you see is Black Rock City, aka Burning Man. And our crew that goes is so if you notice on the right side of the screen, at the bottom of the sea, or the bottom section of the sea, there's a big round circle. That's center camp. And if you would go further out to the right towards the backside of the city, we're camped usually in that zone. In the middle of the opening area is the man pavilion, where they put the man effigy, and the reason it's called Burning Man is because there is a large man effigy that's placed and then burned at the end of the week. And then further out, where the sea opens up, the sea shape of the city all starts to open up, you're going to see a larger structure further out, and that's the temple, and then that's called Deep Playa. The whole beach is called, or pardon me, playa is Spanish for beach, but the whole dry lake bed is called a playa. And then you have hundreds of art pieces scattered all over that part of the desert. So let's just give you a good overview. This is 65, 75, 80,000 people, all converging in one spot. That's the lineup going in. It sucks. You've got about a 4 mile or so run to get off the pavement to the site of the city. The shortest I ever got in was 2023. I just drove right up to the gate. I was in shock. Every year I have been there before, it was 6, 7, 8 hours. I think the longest was 11 hours in lineup. And 2023 was an exceptional year because we had climate change protesters blocking the south highway coming up from Reno. And those of us coming from the north had a wide open, empty road. And so the climate change protesters had hauled a trailer across the highway, chained themselves to it, and then blockaded everything. And what was not known was the day before, and they were, by the way, this was happening on a reservation. What was not known was the day before there had been, I believe, a shooting. Guns were drawn and somebody was shot in the reservation. And so when all of a sudden burners who were tired of waiting in line forever and forever for the climate change protesters to stop global warming or global cooling or global something, they finally called 911, and the Rangers came out with guns drawn, and it was showtime. And at some point, you can see the video of it. The reservation ranger just takes his truck, plows right through the trailer, and with the person still chained to it. It was.
Oh, I'm sorry for laughing, but
it looked like a wild show. But
yeah,
little did I know. Yeah, little did I know that when I arrived, I could drive right to the gate because there's nobody around. Everybody was blocked by the climate people.
Yes, go.
Can I point out how hypocritical Burning Man is?
I was waiting for that.
You're sitting in traffic for hours and hours in a car, burning gas, just idling there, producing a bunch of the dreaded carbon dioxide and other gases. Then you park somewhere on a dried up lake bed to a massive city where people are doing God knows what in the middle of nowhere, leaving trash.
I do know what,
And then you have a giant statue with thousands of pounds of wood
Yep.
that you burn, because apparently smoke isn't made up of a bunch of carbon dioxide that will also cause global warming or
So it's
climate
gotta be
change or
something.
something.
Oh, totally, MJ. And then what's even better, and I don't know if I have any pictures of Burning Man at night in this presentation. I wish I, maybe I, yeah.
I had it before.
Yeah, there's so much stuff. Go online or don't go online and check it out. But the amount of generators that's used to get the place lit up,
Oh yeah.
the amount of propane that's burnt, it is impressive. Yeah.
We're saving the planet one generation at a time.
Yeah. In fact, that your criticism, MJ, is an internal debate that the Burning Man community has had for probably at least 15 or 20 years, because they do realize the hypocrisy. At least some of them realize the hypocrisy.
Yeah, some of them don't care about
Massive.
Exactly. And the climate there, speaking about climate change, the climate there can be harsh. Yeah. So this is my tent. Last year, I set up my tent on the edge of a big dust storm. Back the one picture, you can see the dust storm rolling in. Then my tent, you'll see the front two panels are shredded right off, and the back end panel was ripped all the way. I've got another shelter inside to try to protect some stuff. I spent, because I had an early access pass in, I arrived 3 days before the rest of my team. So I had to determine what of my stuff would be destroyed and left outside while the dust storm raged. And I slept in my car for 3 days. Joy. And the dust is intense. It's an alkali dust. Everything rusts. Everything gets beat up. Your vehicles will take a beating.
Gets sandblasted, literally. Right?
Yep. And your tents, your clothing, your equipment will get ruined. And as the picture demonstrates. So Burning Man is literally a type of crossroads for reenchantment. It is, and this hits me every time I go, it is secular and spiritual. It is mystical and material, all at the same time. And you cannot get away from that. It's always there in front of you. The spiritual side is always there. That mystical side, the building of an entire mythos is what is actually happening. And yet all this is happening within a realm that totally rejects, of course, the Christian God.
Yeah.
In fact, Christianity is the only thing and the only religion that I see out there that is consistently mocked. And I've actually had a conversation a couple of years ago with a gentleman who has been a longtime burner, and we were at the fence. This is 2023, watching people trying to get out in the mud. And we ended up having a conversation about religion at Burning Man. And I'm like, as a Christian, and I was very open about me being a Christian. It's part of why we go. This is a place that mocks Christianity. And he's like, what? No, not really. And then he was kind of having to think about it. He wasn't a Christian. So for him, he's oblivious. And all of a sudden he realizes, you're right. We're not mocking Islam out here. I've never seen Islam mocked once. They don't mock Buddhism or Hinduism. Yeah, you see some stuff that's kind of silly built around it, but there's not mockery. There's a lot of mockery when it comes to Christianity. But there are big conversations that are happening, huge conversations on technology, digital governance, ecology, psychedelics. The World Bank has had one of their former chief economists doing research at Burning Man to see how to integrate the lessons from this event into World Bank programs. You always have both Republican and Democrat congressmen and senators who are in attendance. You have governors who are in attendance. I tell people it is a combination of the World Economic Forum and Mardi Gras. And that's probably the best way to describe it. One of our campmates has described the nudity, the sexuality, the buzz that's always around that as the psyops for what's really taking place. Because if you take a look, especially within the Christian culture, everybody focuses on the hedonism, because that's what gets your responses on social media, and it does. But it ignores the serious conversations that are also taking place.
Right. And going back to what Paul mentioned, and you were reading in Acts.
Yes.
When he tells them, men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. And I think that part kind of focuses on what you're talking about. Or,
Yeah.
you know, it's what's presented. There's a lot of religiosity, but not enough truth at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding, James. And it is an eclectic mix of religiosity.
Right.
It's impossible to say, or actually, it's impossible to have an overall narrative the way you would with, let's say, Mormonism,
right,
or with Jehovah's Witnesses, because there is such diversity. I've talked to Muslims out there, talked to Hindus out there, and then tons of atheists, Wiccans and other neo-pagans, and people who are searching. In fact, this last year I ended up having an incredible conversation with a lady from France who, when she found out we were Christians, and I can tell you a little bit about the backstory to this encounter, she just flat out said, I have never, until you talked about your faith, I have never even thought about religion, let alone Christianity. It has never entered my mind.
Wow. And
we're like, okay. We had to begin actually with, ground zero, Genesis 1:1 with her.
Yeah.
So a little bit of history just so you have an idea of where this popped out of. If you see pictures online of Burning Man photos or imagery from the 1960s or the 1920s, because some of that imagery is actually out there, that is all AI generated imagery, because the event didn't happen until 1986. And it happened in 1986 at the summer solstice on Baker Beach in San Francisco, when Larry Harvey and a handful of friends hammered together a 9-foot human effigy, threw some gas on it, had some beer, lit it up when the sun hit the water, and went, yay! And that was it. And then they did it the next year, and at that point, a group called the Cacophony Society, which is an underground, a guerrilla art movement in San Francisco, heard about this, and the Cacophony Society would do crazy things. They also were a spin-off of another group called the Suicide Club, and they would do absolutely insane things. And they caught wind of this effigy burn on the beach, and all of a sudden, news spread, and piles of people, hundreds of people show up at the beach in 1990, and ready to burn this big effigy, and the cops show up. And you can't do this here because you don't have a permit. In our bureaucratic age, permits are more important than almost anything. So they had to take the man and their idea. And Cacophony said, hey, we know a spot out in the desert of northern Nevada where nobody will bother us. We just need to get permission from the Bureau of Land Management. And off they went. So there was 500 people in attendance the first time they did it in northern Nevada. And then by 1997, 10,000 people were in attendance. By 2010, attendance was over 50,000 people. In 2014, the man was 105 feet tall. Attendance in 2019 was 70,000 plus 10,000 volunteers. During COVID, they had built big virtual burns because this is Silicon Valley's event, as you'll see. And then, of course, 2023 was the Mud Man, as we received rain after rain after rain. And social media lit up with rumors of cannibalism and with FEMA on the edge of the desert ready to take control, and a giant prehistoric shrimp arising out of the muck. What else was there? Some bizarre disease that's causing every one of us to vomit blood. That was being circulated.
Wow.
The list, it was just insanity, such insanity. And there was so much fun when I finally was in range that I could receive signal with my phone, and my phone after 10 or 50, whatever it was, 12 days, lit right up with hundreds of questions. Are you alive? Are you okay? It's just rain, people. It's just mud.
Yeah.
Like, hello. Yes.
So the Burning Man became a Mud Man, huh?
Oh, totally.
Oh, wow.
I got a couple of pictures to show you.
It was all of that information was just pulling your leg, not eating your leg.
Oh, it was unbelievable. It demonstrated the complete silliness that happens with social media.
Of course.
So Burning Man is a container. Burning Man is understood to be, and that's what Transformational Festivals, as we talked about last week, it's a container. It's a place where you explore sexuality, sensuality, relationships, consciousness, spirituality, visions of what tomorrow will be. Larry Harvey described it this way: this may be the essential genius of Burning Man. Out of nothing, we created everything, which is kind of, a little bit sacrilegious, I would say.
Yeah.
Burning Man also operates with 10 principles. Has to have 10. It's got to be 10. In fact, my friend Bob Worley, he's been going to Burning Man since the mid-1990s as a Christian witness. When the 10 principles were announced, I can't remember who it was that he approached, somebody on the organization or somebody fairly high up in the structure, and basically accused them of creating a Christian event.
Oh,
and they were like, "What are you talking about, Bob?" And he was like, "Well, it isn't that you have 8 principles or 15 principles. You've got 10 principles.
Yeah.
10 guiding commandments."
Could have come up with 3 more. They would have 13.
Exactly.
Holy number.
Yes. So there's an 11th unwritten principle called consent, because the problem of sexual overtures that are made there. So your 10 principles are radical inclusion, gifting. There's no economy. There's no buying or selling. There's no bartering. You're gifting. You gift food. I've been gifted clothing. I've been gifted drugs. I've been gifted items of jewelry. And you accept graciously, and if you don't want it, you dispose of it privately. Nevertheless, I've had some very interesting gifts of books. It's been quite interesting, and I'm there giving out gifts as well. I give out copies of my book. So I have copies. We give out other literature as well. And we're always looking, what can we do to improve our gifting? We'd like to be able to start producing some swag from our camp. Start giving that out as well, because that's a big deal. Decommodification, radical self-reliance, and some of this you're going to be going, oh, there's a conflict, there's tension with this, and actually it was written to have that in place. Radical self-expression, communal effort, civic responsibility, leave no trace. So there are no garbage cans, and there is relatively little trash. All things considered. Of course, if you live in Reno or the surrounding communities, you would beg otherwise. You'd be saying, well, you dump the trash in our backyard. And unfortunately, that's pretty true. Participation, you're not just there as a spectator. You are to participate. And immediacy, do it now. Right, Jeff? You were there. What year, Jeff, did you go?
Must have been 2012, maybe 2011 and 2013. I went 2 years, separated by a year, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So some of this is gonna be a trip down memory lane.
Well, you got a question. I've got a question. Because you've been there quite a few times, and you were looking at gifting some things. I got a bunch of little blocks, and they just say 2 words. They say, "but God." It got me thinking that, what kind of response do you have with, maybe even the majority or, half the people? If you just say God, you don't say Jesus, of course, but
No, you say Jesus. Oh yeah, no, Jeff, we do say Jesus. No, but that's actually cool.
Okay. So I think many of them would be okay with God, though. Many more that would not be okay with Jesus. You know my point here.
Right. No.
So have you tried that just to see?
Oh yeah. No. In fact, one of the gifts that we give. So Brian and Audrey, you go with us. Brian is a blacksmith, and he creates these beautiful
crosses.
Yes, beautiful crosses. Yes. And so he hands them out, and 2023. I was right beside him when he handed this across to a girl, this young lady, and it was midnight. We were watching the Tower of Babel burn, and I'll show you a picture of Babel. We actually had a chapel to Babel. And after it was burning, at some point, he gives this cross to this girl that they'd had this conversation going back and forth. And he just simply says to her, as he's giving her this cross, he explains how he made it. He just simply says, trust Jesus. And she breaks. And I mean, she breaks. The tears are just pouring down as she is holding this cross and staring into Brian's eyes and staring into his eyes, and she is weeping. And finally she turns and looks into Audrey's eyes and is just weeping and weeping and weeping, and turns and clutches my shoulder, and the tears are just streaming down her face. And she had been telling us all about how she's on a journey and all kinds of stuff. And we sometimes, especially as guys, we don't quite catch all the cues. And I don't think we realized what she actually was talking about when she was talking about this life journey that she was on. And whatever happened, whatever her background is, I don't know. But those two words, trust Jesus, and the gift of that cross, shook her hard. And I would love to have known the backstory.
Sure.
But her boyfriend or her husband or whatever was sitting beside her, give her a little bump, and they got up and left. And we were like, wow, what just happened? I mean, it was right, because it was actually awkward.
Yeah.
When you got this lady holding your shoulder, eye contact, and the tears are just streaming and streaming and streaming, and no words are being said for like it's already past the awkward stage, and you're not going to break eye contact because it's hitting you as well as you see what's happening.
Can we go back to the principles for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I assume that there's a semi-official definition or explanation for each one of them.
Yes,
but
sir.
I'm curious, how does self-reliance and communal fit together in the same ethic?
Great question.
I think it would be interesting to try to do that, but on the surface, it doesn't look like they both belong in the same list.
Right.
And that, again, is that tension that is actually baked into it. So you are to be self-reliant. You're supposed to bring all your own food, all your own water, bring all your own survival equipment, everything that you're going to need, and depend on yourself to get you through. And yet, at the same time, you are constantly interacting with the camps around you, with your neighbors, the strangers, the people that you're going to be bumping into all along the way. If you see something that needs to be done, get in there and do it. It's also called a duocracy. That's how they describe it. So it's not a democracy. It's a duocracy. You do. So it's you hold these two things together. You've got to be able to live on your own and be on your own. If that happens, at the same time, you're in charge of also being your brother's keeper too.
Yeah, so, I mean, self-reliance and community, I think, are, if you define it right and do it right, they're consistent. But radical self-reliance and communal effort, I'm having a hard time. And
to be fair, Dr. Williams, the radical side of self-reliance is I don't really think anybody there is truly radically self-reliant, or at least not as many people as would like to think they are. Especially when they're coming in with their great big huge RVs.
Yeah.
What I forget? Oh yeah, my entire house.
Exactly.
Right. And that again is some of the internal contradictions as you have, especially for those who are of the Hollywood rich and famous type. They'll fly in with a Learjet. And then they go to their great big what's called a plug and play camp, and you've got 6-figure RVs all built into this great big like a fortress, and they bring in their own chefs.
Of course.
And they have
wow. Anybody ever parachuted down?
Yeah, I've been hiking up in the Rockies and run into hunting camps that people spent more money on their hunting camp than their house.
Yep. Oh, I hear you. Yes.
So did you say that Christians weren't really accepted all that well? Did I hear you say that?
It all depends. I mean, we've had situations, Jeff, where people, one year when they found out we had a camp behind us, when they found out we were Christians, and they wouldn't even look at us in the eye for the rest of the week, and they had to pass through our camp to get to the street, and they were pretty upset. And yet at the same time, we've had, for the most part, the opposite response, which is, "Wow, really?
Yeah.
And can we talk?" We've had far more of that than flat out denial or flat out conflict.
Radical
So-
exclusion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's
Yeah.
really, really cool. Like last year, we were camped beside an ex-youth pastor, and we literally just loved on the guy the whole week. In fact, in a drunken stupor, the guy fell, sliced his arm wide open, and my daughter ended up for 2 days changing his bandages. And we were sharing food and going back and forth with him daily, like all the time. And he knew why we were there. We made it very clear to him. So, yeah, he didn't come into any of our Bible studies. He stayed away from that. He didn't follow the participation or immediacy.
Right.
And I didn't push it with him either, because I didn't want to drive a wedge when I knew that would drive a wedge.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our love on him and the talks we had with him there was already a softening, and I wanted to make sure that was remained in play and didn't want to drive something deeper.
Sure.
So yeah.
Interesting.
Alrighty. Burning Man isn't the only event. There is roughly 108 or 110 regional burns around the world, lots across the U.S. Colorado, you folks have at least a couple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a few.
Yep. The West Coast has a number of them. The East Coast does too. In Canada, we have them in Alberta and British Columbia. There is a Burning Man event in South Africa. It's actually the second largest. Happens in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Israel has one called Mid-Burn, where they burn an effigy of Adam and Eve.
Of course they would.
Yep. I know.
And then they make apple pie.
Yeah.
There you go. And share it with each other.
But it is absolutely the cutting edge of culture. There's no question. This has influenced whole new movements, technologies. If you use Google Maps, it was all beta tested at Burning Man first. The reason they have Google up and the first Google Doodle was the Burning Man image. That's what you're seeing on the screen. That was put up in 1998, the week of Burning Man. That was when Larry Page and the rest of his crew said to their attorneys, "Adios, you figure out the paperwork in terms of getting us incorporated." I cannot remember how many millions of dollars that they lost in making that decision, but they hung up their shingle, and that was the Burning Man symbol, the very first Google Doodle, and told all of Silicon Valley, "We're out of here. We're burners first." So important was Burning Man to Google and this interchange between this counterculture in the desert and Silicon Valley, that Google had in-house videos for how their employees were supposed to train and handle and understand going to the burn, and their art pieces that would decorate their offices all came out of the burn experience. And then when Eric Schmidt became CEO of Google and made it the absolute powerhouse it is today, the reason he was hired, one of the main reasons he was hired, and it's actually a very famous story, is he had Burning Man on his resume. And so this is where all of a sudden I think people's eyes kind of get wide and their mouths should drop open, because that group, that organization, Google, has changed the world. And it has done so because and through the experience of Burning Man. And I tell my class this, and I tell my audience when I do lectures on this topic, because I do go into it far deeper. You are all, whether you know it or not, you're all digital burners. You are all using the products, the incubated ideas, the networked projects that have popped up out of this place, and it has landed in the apps and the programs you're using. So that's a really interesting angle to all of this.
Yeah.
And of course, it's even influenced politics. As I said earlier, we do have congressional representatives, governors, officials from some pretty big places. So important is the Burning Man to San Francisco and its impact on America. Again, this is something that so many Christians just don't quite grasp because they only see it in one dimension, and that is the dimension that this is a hedonistic party.
Right.
But so important is this that the Smithsonian Institute in 2019, I think 18 and 19, devoted the entire Renwick Gallery to Burning Man. I have never seen them do that with the JWs. I haven't seen them do that with the Hare Krishnas. But they did that with Burning Man. So that screams volumes. My wife and I in 2019 were in Cincinnati when they changed over the entire Cincinnati art gallery was made into a great big Burning Man gallery and display. So yeah. Yeah, Burning Snowman usually takes place around the spring equinox.
Wouldn't that be melting snowman?
It's a giant bonfire, and it's very family friendly.
Oh,
it would.
I'm sure it is.
It would be, yes.
Do they call that Burning Man or Melting Man?
There is an event called Melting Man, a regional burn in North Dakota called Melting Man.
Oh,
Okay, there you go.
Yep.
that's where Frosty goes.
Yeah. So I thought this quote from Larry Harvey was extremely telling. In 2017, the theme that year, and Burning Man operates with themes every year, and the theme that year was radical ritual. And he said it this way. He says, the moral of our theme, in fact, was that it doesn't really matter what you believe, it's what you experience. The whole point this year was to convince people that Burning Man is a spiritual movement. It's not a religion, but it's a spiritual movement, and you know it when you see it. I was like, yep, that explains a lot. So I'll just give you a quick few slides, taking you through the years that I've been there. There
Is
you
that
go,
Jeffrey?
No, that's the Jeffrey man. In 2017, he was put in his own temple.
Good going, Jeff.
And it was a big structure. It was a huge structure.
Yikes.
And that year, it was interesting because it was a bit of a controversy inside the city. First time that the man was put in his own pagoda, his own temple. 2018 was the theme I, Robot. And the man, if you can see it from the top down, was placed in the center of a 12-wheel or a 12-cog wheel structure with 12 different robot effigies all turning to the man.
Of course.
2019 was Metamorphosis, asking the question, can man change? Can man evolve? 2018, the question was really, can man and machine merge? Lots of transhumanist conversations. 2023 was Animalia, with lots of imagery depicting this changeover of man and animal. And the man that year was placed on a base that had a great big honeycomb built around him and under him, demonstrating that you're just part of the hive.
Okay.
Last year was Curiouser and Curiouser. This year, by the way, is, I think, tomorrow today. So why not?
Wow.
And then everybody gathers around. We have hundreds and hundreds of art vehicles, tens and tens of thousands of people. It is loud. It is explosive. It is intense. The noise is all around you constantly, and there is flames and fireworks. Probably one of the best fireworks displays you will ever see. And the man goes kaboom. What really sets...
They get creative with their temples or Burning Man. Or
the art is pretty amazing.
Oh, the art is very creative. Absolutely. In fact, that opens up conversations that and this is some of the conversations we've had around the art is even the point that art, and this is something I just let me back up. Art is something the Christian community should understand because it speaks to worldviews, even
Yeah.
sometimes the techniques that we use.
Mhm.
And art is an incredibly important tool to demonstrate that we are not the same as the animal kingdom. We are fundamentally different, and art is one of those ways of demonstrating tangibly that difference. So we've used art and then what we're seeing at Burning Man to open up those conversations, demonstrating that we're not the same as the animal world. Beavers build dams, it's the same dam every time. Eagles build nests, it's always the same nest every time. There are animals that will do incredibly creative acts around certain mating rituals, but it's always the same. Man does something very different with art. And so as a Christian, we need to leverage that and share the gospel. So the temple is the other element to Burning Man. It's actually more important than the man already in terms of its importance inside the community. This is the 17 temple. These are huge structures. All of this is done by volunteers, by the way. 2018 was the Temple of Galaxia, the cosmic Gaia. 65 feet tall, 250 feet wide, spiraling into the sky. The top cone, we didn't find out until later, when they put the top cone on, it was crushing the structure underneath it. And so they had to race to Reno, get basically a truckload of industrial ratchet straps. And then they ratchet strapped this multi-ton cone on the top. And all week long, people are down below.
Try not to look up. Crazy.
2019.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah, it was quite. It's again beautiful buildings.
Yeah.
2023, the Temple of the Heart. I think it was 900 sheets of plywood that made up the top of the structure. It's just absolutely insane the amount of funding that was thrown into it. That's what it looked like that year when a dust storm hit. Everybody, of course, talks about how wet it was, but in the beginning of the week, we had dust storms. And that was last year's. Absolutely enormous. Absolutely overpowering buildings. Now, this is the important part of the temple. The temple begins as an empty slate. The walls are bare. There's nothing on the walls. It is meant then to be filled up by your emotional participation. So all week long, people are there meditating and praying.
Taking naps.
And taking naps and crying and crying. And it is a place of weeping and mourning and gnashing of teeth. And if you see what's on the wall, this is earlier in the week. As the week progresses, the walls are mounded up with personal items, artifacts, wedding dresses, urns of dead the ashes of dead loved ones. In fact, that's actually created a conversation of just saying, hey, don't do this anymore. Photo albums and lots of scribbled notes on the walls as people pour out their grief. So I'm holding in my hand a suicide note from a person who has said, hey, if I am successful in my suicide, my friends, fellow burners, please bring my note to the temple. As you're reading it, you're going, this is hard.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's the stuff you see. And then what you hear, you'll hear sometimes musically played, you'll hear whispers, quiet whispers, but you mostly hear crying. And sometimes the crying and the mourning is so intense, people have complete breakdowns. And I've been there when that has occurred. So they have what's called temple guardians, people who are specifically trained. They'll come alongside and they'll try to keep control as the person is losing themselves,
falling apart.
Yeah, totally falling apart. And sometimes it's not just quiet falling apart. It is.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's wailing. It's wailing.
Wow.
Yep, some hard stuff. And then the humanity of it is what actually hits you.
Sure.
And you realize that, look, we are created in God's image. Every person there has value because of who made them, not because of what they've done. Not at all. None of us have that value.
Mm-hmm.
Value has come because of who made us. And so then it makes it far more important that we recognize their humanity as they're pouring themselves out. This one was wild.
Ooh.
I rate my daughter and live with it every day. I know she has forgiven me, but I can't forgive myself. And then, of course, it goes on. But wow, just hard things. For this temple, I burn my previous judgment, fundamentalism, bigotry, and religious imprisonment. Let's be free, kind, and full of joy.
I like that one. Call your parents. They love this.
I know. Oh, there's always silliness interjected with everything.
Sure.
But the overall theme is
very, very sad.
Yeah, we were there in 2019 when they did the opening for the temple, and the Guardians were so excited that the opening for the temple that year was a wedding, and it was a gay wedding, and that's how they opened it. And we watched it, we documented it, and so it's quite a cauldron or a boiling point of all kinds of things. And then at the end they burn it. So that's this year's temple. The hands, I'll go back real fast. There you see the hands as you go into the temple, and there
now
you
it's
see
over.
Yep, now it's over. Now the difference between this, when this is burning, and the man, it's a party. It's loud. It's exciting. It's it's a spectacle. This is quiet.
More solemn.
Totally. All you hear is the crackling of the flames, and you hear people crying.
Does this happen first and then the man, or
the man burns first? The man burns on Saturday, the last Saturday of the event, and then the temple burns on Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Carl.
Yo.
So one of the things we talk about is faith. We've got faith in the Bible and the Lord Jesus and that, but all these things they're putting up in the temple there.
Yep.
I think many of these people actually believe that there's power in that release, that when that burns, right, that there's some kind of mystical power that now this will bleed out of their life a little, or they'll be totally free of it or something. And I'm just pointing that out. It's an interesting bit of faith they have in what?
Absolutely right, Jeff. Absolutely.
The unknown God.
Right. Yeah, you're right. The unknown God. We have asked the question after the temple is burned. We've asked the question of people. Have you left? Did you leave anything in the temple? Yes. Do you feel release now? And they just sigh. No.
No, their faith was for naught.
Exactly.
I know. But I understand the need. I get that. If you don't have Christ, if you can't put it on His shoulders, all you've got is this.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Effigies and
right.
I'm not going to idolatry.
Right. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, John. So 2020 and 2021, they had a virtual burn, and I give them credit because it was, and that's
literally virtual.
That's yours truly with the headset on.
Nice.
And I give them credit because it's Silicon Valley's event. They did a remarkable job. This is all virtual worlds. And the first year, 2020, I think I did 65 hours in world that week, strapped it to an Oculus. And my eyes are just buggy. And then 2021, I think I spent like 40 or 45 hours. Yeah, your eyes are just like, whoa, where am I? You take the headset off, you're like, oh, I'm in my living room. I just had a 2-hour conversation or a half-hour conversation with somebody, around the temple or at the Man or at some other crazy art piece.
Right.
All done in the virtual. That's one of the temples they had. Wow. This is not virtual.
Oh, okay, I was going to say. Pretty good.
Yeah, this is the 2023 Chapel of Babel, on the outside and the inside. What you don't see if I had uploaded the video, I do a walkthrough, and you can see 2 closets decorated, I think, with pink elephants, and they were confessional booths. and you could open the door, go inside the confessional booth, and confess your sins to one of the resident artists who would be there for the duration of the day. 2023, this was another temple. You see it on the upper left corner, an Aztec temple. As you go inside, however, you had the 4 walls with 4 different deity themes: Egyptian, Aztec, and indigenous, Buddhist with Hinduism mixed into it. Actually, it's all Hindu, but they do a Buddhist figurehead in the center. I believe that's no, maybe it's not. Regardless, it is Ganesha on the one side and Krishna on the other. And then in the very, very center, you've got the green man representing the pagan Wiccan perspective. There's some pictures from 2023. Our mud. That's the porta potty on the bottom. That is not stuff coming out of the porta potty. That is the pounds of mud that we tracked in every day. Bicycles abandoned, vehicles abandoned. The mannequin stuffed underneath the U-Haul was just across from our tent. I just thought it was a great picture.
Yeah.
You know, the guy was stuck. His U-Haul's stuck. What better thing to do than shove a mannequin underneath and make it look a little bit more ridiculous?
Yeah.
The politics of the place. This is last year. This is 2024. These are all signs. It says "I'm fine." These are all signs taken from the battlefields of Ukraine. All the holes are bullet holes, shell holes, shrapnel holes. I'm a hunter. I'm a shooter. I walked around, and you could, as a shooter, you can tell you're looking, going, okay, well, there's an exchange of gunfire here. You've got exiting and entry rounds going through the metal. I was here one day when there was a young lady staring up at one of the signs on the top, and the tears are streaming down her face, and she's pointing and she's going, "That's my city." And so it's pretty intense. In 2023, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense for Digital Warfare, instead of being in Ukraine fighting, was at Burning Man setting up art pieces to try to win the propaganda war. Because this is a place where the propaganda war on a global level gets played out.
Sure.
Here's another example. So 2024, one of the more intense realities that happened was this conflict. And I'm saying it's a conflict at Burning Man. The tension was real between Israelis and pro-Palestinians, pro-Hamas. So we had a huge camp structure set up to remember those who died on October the 7th at the Nova Festival, because the music festival for the Nova Festival wasn't just a music festival. It was a transformational event. In many respects, it was a parallel to Burning Man, just on a much smaller scale. And then at the same time, we had Arab and pro-Palestinian camps. One of our guys in our camp watched as somebody on an art vehicle with a Palestinian or a Hamas flag came up to an Israeli camp and started shouting and cursing at them. Some things were happening at the temple in terms of the propaganda war that were concerning enough that by Friday night, all the police in the city were pulled out of Black Rock City, extra forces brought in, and we had police trucks circling the man, police trucks circling the temple, and police trucks and a heavy police presence in all the large community gathering points. One of our team asked what's going on, and the basic response was, we are expecting something big to happen. And it makes sense, because if somebody dies at Burning Man, and last year somebody died, and in fact we saw the person laying in the street, it makes national news. If 5 drops of rain fall at Burning Man at the end of the week and make a little bit of mud, CNN is flying over with helicopters. If you want to make a splash at a global level, the whole world's eyes is on this place, like nowhere else.
Wow.
So if something goes kaboom, it's a propaganda coup.
Sure.
And yes, Christianity is mocked.
Wow.
Yep. And we go to workshops, we go to lots of lectures, conversations. The one larger picture on the right, Brian and Audrey are in there, I believe, somewhere. Yep, there they are. Brian's got the orange shirt on.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Audrey's beside him on the other side. That is the other Christian, so-called Christian camp. It's a progressive Christian camp called RAF, for religious as, use the F word and you got it.
Right.
And they were doing workshops on Jesus, psychedelics, and healing.
What a combo.
And in fact, just a few weeks before that, and we related that during the interfaith talk we had a couple of weeks ago, Dawn and myself, we were at the Parliament where they talked about this at an institutional level. Now I'm at Burning Man. We were hearing it from Methodist, Baptist, Episcopal ministers.
They get around.
Right, as they're justifying it.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're feeling Jesus. They're feeling agape love.
Of course.
That's the angle. You're like, wow, exactly, wow. We're looking at wrapping up pretty quick. Reverend Billy, in 2017, I got a chance to listen to Reverend Billy's famous Sunday sermon at Center Camp. He's a known figure in the burn culture, and so he gave us a Sunday sermon. And he was dressed up in his clerical collar and his costume. And these were the notes I have from his sermon. We have fired the patriarchal God who claims to know everything. Science doesn't know everything. Wow, okay. We have this happening. Yeah. So where do we turn? To ourselves and to the sacred earth. Welcome to reenchantment. He's just laying this out.
Yeah.
Then he describes the earth sustains and embraces us. Trust the earth, even in our death. Everybody say a big Earth-alleluia. And the whole camp yelled out, the whole center camp was yelling out, Earth-alleluia.
From the earth sustains and embraces us. Has he never been to Australia? That place is like God's oopsie bin. Like, I made the spider way too big and way too poisonous.
And MJ, to your point, the irony is actually right there at Burning Man, because take away all the structures, take away the water, everything else, go and try to cross that desert.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
A month ago, I finished reading a fascinating book on the pioneers who first tried to cross the desert on the way to the California goldfields. Oh, it's a death zone.
Yeah.
It's absolute destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big Earth Hallelujah? Not for those folks.
And if you took away the creature comforts of all the people at Burning Man, only a fraction of the people would still be there, I think, because
I totally agree.
most people can't handle that. It really can't.
It would probably
Totally right, Krista.
be like the Donner Party. Just people each other.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And what's interesting is 2020 and 2021, they did something called the Renegade Burn, because there was no Burning Man, official Burning Man that year. Everything was supposed to go virtual because of, COVID and stuff.
Yeah.
But the first year, 2020, they had, I can't remember how many thousands show up, and they just did it. And then 2021, they had a much larger one. So, yeah. All right, next set of slides. We look at closing pretty quickly because it's after 9. I realize that. Awesome. That's our crew.
All right.
Over the years, a handful of us. So our camp is called the Camp of the Unknown God. My buddy Bob in his blue with his darker blue bandana right in the center. I think that was 2018. My friend Jen Wright is on the bottom, part of our crew that year. The Pope. The Pope. Oh, no, it's a Pope.
Oh, it's a Pope. I'm sorry.
2018, we had a camp behind us, an unregistered camp called Bad Catholics. And that day happened to be the day that they probably wore the most amount of clothes. At least she did. And so,
good for you.
Oh my goodness,
my eyes have been hurting. But anyway,
there was a young couple in the adjacent camp beside us, and they obviously were in love with each other. So the Bad Catholics came out in their papal gear. We had a bishop only wearing his mitre, nothing else. And they stopped some rolling whiskey bar that was coming through the streets, commandeered it so that they could do communion, and married this young couple right there in the middle of the street. Yeah, that's the stuff you're going to see. 2018, pardon me, we had people who literally moved in alongside of us to continue having conversations about Christianity. In fact, on the far side, you've got a fellow by the name of Justin holding Adam, shoulder to shoulder there. Adam's the guy with the jacket on. Adam moved in with us. He wasn't part of our crew at all, not a Christian. But all week long, he heard conversation after conversation. He wanted conversations.
Nice.
At some point during the week, Adam and I were out bicycling late at night. And I stopped him and I just said to him, I said, "What's wrong with you, dude? You're at Burning Man. You literally have every imaginable opportunity under the sun. Everything sensual and sexual is here. And you're hanging out with a bunch of Christians. Like, what's wrong with you?" And he's looking at me going, "I'm learning so much from you guys."
Wow.
And so we're like, that's it. Adam just encapsulated it. This is our team last year. We did Bible study every morning. We had people join us in the middle of the week who we are still in contact with. Golly, the amount of stories that came out of last year was insane. In 2023, I did 300 surveys. Brian and Audrey helped me. Brian and Audrey are the folks at the very far end of the picture. They helped me do 300 surveys in 2023. This year we had 8 people. I thought we could bang out 500 surveys. Nah, not even close. We maybe got 30 done because we had so many conversations. We couldn't get our surveys done. We just had conversation after conversation for Christ. Lots. People were hunting us down. Ginny, the lady wearing the pink, she thankfully was at the camp one afternoon. Some lady had been looking for our camp. And I don't know if her husband was with, but she came and she was specifically looking for us. She'd heard there was serious Christians and wanted a time of prayer and wanted to work through what Christianity was about. And so Ginny and George are discipling them. And we have, I believe, another couple that are being discipled. And we are in ongoing conversations with at least 2 or 3 others as well.
Nice.
So, Carl, was there 1 or 2 things that were most received? Like, you had a lot of conversations. Out of all those, were there like a couple things that really worked, that they were interested in, that they responded to?
Yep, 100%. It's some eclectic stuff, but the one, Jeff, that really kind of sticks out more than anything else, we go to workshops because I'm doing the research for other stuff, doing research on AI, governance, all kinds of things. And you're hearing stuff in these workshops that are just fundamentally untrue. And so there would be many times, and in the past, I wouldn't do this so much because I'm there doing research. You don't want to interfere in, as a researcher. You're there doing sociological research. But this last year, I couldn't take the BS anymore on a couple of occasions. And my hand would go up, or one of the other crew members' hands would go up, and we would challenge a basic assumption. That's all we would do. And we do it respectfully, but we'd challenge an assumption. An example, one of the workshops we went to was on giving nature legal rights, the same legal rights as humans.
Right.
And it was being done by a person deep in the movement to make this happen at a legal level. And it is happening, by the way. It's already taking shape in a couple of Latin American countries. And he's at the cutting edge of this. And he was describing how there fundamentally is no difference between beavers and dust and us.
Boy.
My hand had to go up. And I said something to the effect of, beavers aren't having these conversations. Deer aren't having these conversations. Geese aren't having these conversations. But the fact that we're having these conversations, pro or con, means that we have a value higher than nature. And of course, the guy giving the lecture, it doesn't faze him. I mean, he stops. He doesn't know what to say, but it doesn't change his mind. Nevertheless, there's a lady right beside me. She turns, she looks at me, and she goes, "You're right."
Well, what a bummer for him.
But this is awesome because her and her friend Ryan now want to have a conversation. And most of our crew is there, and we're at the Earth Guardian camp, literally the hub for Black Rock City's sustainability, Agenda 2030, climate change initiatives. Thankfully, they leave us alone, and for the rest of the afternoon, our crew with these two people spend time in prayer, spend time explaining the gospel, breaking it all down. I later go to their camp. I give them both copies of my book. I invite them to our morning Bible study. They come to our Bible study. I was shocked by that. I didn't expect it to happen. The morning that they arrived, we were going through Psalm 51. Rosie, wonderful, wonderful young lady, wanted to read the passage. Sure, okay. Not Christians. Ryan's a magician. Rosie is playing with Wiccan worldviews. So she's reading, and we're reading Psalm 51 that morning. And so she says, she reads it, Psalm 51. And it says something to the effect of when David goes into Bathsheba.
Right.
And because she's not a Christian, she doesn't know what not to do. So she goes like this, number 1. And then she reads the first verse.
Right.
Then she goes, number 2. And reads the next verse. Yeah. And she just goes down each line like that. And she's probably not even a quarter way through, a halfway through. And the tears are just streaming, and she is struggling to keep reading because she recognizes herself in David's position.
Wow.
Hello. Was it worth it for that? 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, that was probably one of the most impactful ways, and that was just simply raising our hands or making some comment. We made another comment in a workshop that drew out the fact that we were Christians, and that ended up having 2 different sets of conversations. One that took place over a couple of days with random running into the same person over again 3 times, which doesn't happen. And the story is too long to tell, but it was amazing. Another example that was so simple. And again, this breaks down that humanity. My daughter came with. In fact, if you just pop the slide back up there, Don. My daughter, I'll go back there. She's the one in the green. She's with us at a place called Camp Mystic, and we're sitting waiting for the next lecture to begin. Austin's about 15 feet behind me or so, 20 feet behind me. And I turn around and I look at one point, and there is a woman on her knees. Austin's sitting on the floor. She's cross-legged on the floor. And there's a woman who has wrapped herself around my daughter's waist, long flowing black hair, and she is just heaving in tears. And I'm not looking back to Austin, and I'm mouthing the words, "Are you okay?" And she's pointing to the woman's head, and with hands raised like this, going, "I don't know what's going on." And what happened was this. Austin's was sitting there, and before the lecture began, she made eye contact with this beautiful woman walking just a few feet away, and she gave a little smile. And the woman stopped in her tracks, rushed to my daughter, didn't walk. She rushed to my daughter, got down on her hands and knees, wrapped herself around her, and bawled for the full afternoon. Ginny came alongside later, the lady in the pink. And then the 2 of them together ministered to her for the rest of the day. Bottom line, here we are in Camp Mystic, a place of incredibly important, influential, beautiful, rich, powerful people. Everyone's put together, and she has never felt more alone in her life. My daughter's smile and eye contact broke her spirit. And that was it. Desperate for human contact.
Wow.
And so she has given, I understand she's given her life to Christ, and her husband have communication with George and Ginny in terms of discipleship. So, yeah. All righty. What time do we have anyways? My apologies.
Yeah, it's 1:29, so it's 9:30 Central Time right
It's
now.
still early.
So there's just a handful of this is our crew from last year, and a handful of the others. The guy in the shirt, the beige shirt with the hat on, who's kind of crouching down. If you look on his one arm, is a big red bandage. That's our neighbor who was a ex-youth leader, ex-youth pastor, and Ryan and Rosie are in the front beside Ginny, who's wearing the blue. Just different people who we encountered during the course of our week. So there we are. Are we going to react with our emotions and go, oh, let them all burn, they're all going to hell anyways?
Right.
Or are we going to respond as being ambassadors? And you don't have to go to Burning Man, because Burning Man has already come to you.
That is so true.
Yeah,
very true. Wow.
So that's what I got, folks.
All right, sir. Wow.
So next week it's what chapter?
Today is the last chapter, and we'll just kind of do a basic wrap up. We'll talk about a few of the points that are in it. I'm not sure if I'll have slides. I may not, but we will conclude with a conversation. So read it, have some questions, and
should we bring matches and burn something or no?
Well, little effigies and light them up.
Yeah, little mini ones.
James, you do have some kind of a prop there, do you not?
Oh, well, no,
Jeff, you got something too, right?
I'll bring this is my emotional.
Your emotional
support.
James, you know, we just burn bridges, is what we do.
Emotional support is lamb chop.
Don't burn her or him.
No, this one doesn't get burned, but it does keep me.
All right, everybody.
Aww.
See you later.
Thank you for joining us.
See you next week.
Good night.